Hey everyone, did you know that over 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button? If you enjoy our content, take a second to subscribe. It's free and it really helps us keep bringing you great stories every day. Logan Hayes always believed in loyalty, consistency, and the quiet, often thankless work of building a future. For years, he had followed a rigid routine, driven by the belief that success came from persistence, and that love too would thrive on such consistency. He had poured every ounce of his energy into his marriage with Clara, a woman who once shared his dreams and ambitions. They met in their early 20s, a love story that seemed destined for a lifetime. Together, they built a life that appeared perfect on the outside, a beautiful home in the suburbs, a steady job, and shared aspirations of growing old together. For Logan, the foundation of their relationship was built on mutual respect. He woke up early, kissed Clara good morning, and rushed off to work. He took pride in the mundane rituals that filled their days, sitting down to dinner together after work, sharing quiet conversations, and planning their future. These were small moments, but they felt meaningful. To him, this was love. This was what mattered. Clara, however, seemed distant. Logan noticed it in the small things: her distracted gaze, her reluctance to share her day, the way she avoided physical affection. At first, he thought it was just stress, something work-related, or the pressure of balancing life's many demands. But over time, the silence between them grew, the space between them widening like an unspoken truth that neither of them could address. Logan's instinct was to work harder, to give more, to love more. Perhaps he thought, if he could make more time for her, show her that he understood the pressure she was under, things would get better. But every effort seemed to fall short. Clara was no longer the woman he married, and he couldn't understand why. The truth came crashing down one evening when Logan arrived home early. He had planned a surprise for Clara, takeout from her favorite restaurant, a bottle of wine, and an evening to relax together. But as he walked through the door, he heard voices from the living room, voices he didn't recognize. His heart sank as he paused, listening to Clara laughing, the sound so light and carefree. But there was something off about it, something unfamiliar. His legs moved forward before his mind could process what was happening. He stepped into the living room and froze. Clara was sitting on the couch, her arm wrapped around another man. His face was familiar, too familiar. It was Jason, her colleague from work, someone Logan had met a few times at office events, someone he had trusted. They were laughing, close to each other, as though they were more than just friends. Logan's world tilted on its axis. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't find his words. He stood there, staring at them as the truth slowly sunk in. The realization wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Clara had betrayed him. She had betrayed everything they had built together. Clara looked up, her eyes wide with shock, then guilt, then something else. Regret, maybe. She quickly pulled away from Jason and stood up, her hands raised in an attempt to explain, but Logan was already turning away. He couldn't bear to listen to her words. He couldn't process the lies that were about to spill from her mouth, the justifications for actions that he couldn't fathom. "Logan, please, let me explain," she pleaded. But he was gone, walking out the door with nothing but a broken heart and a mind consumed by questions. His hands shook, his thoughts scattered. He couldn't even think straight. He had always been the steady one, the rock. But now, standing outside their house in the cold evening air, he felt hollow, like a part of him had been ripped out and he didn't know how to put it back together. He spent the rest of the night walking aimlessly through the city. It was as if his body had taken control and his mind was trapped in a fog. How could she do this? How could she betray him so easily, so effortlessly? The pain in his chest was almost physical, like a weight he couldn't escape. He had given her everything: his time, his trust, his loyalty. And this was how she repaid him. It didn't make sense. It didn't add up. The days that followed were a blur. Logan moved through life in a daze. He couldn't focus at work. He couldn't sleep. Every conversation with Clara felt like a performance, a sad attempt to pretend that things could go back to normal. But nothing could. She apologized, of course, over and over again. But her words didn't hold weight anymore. They were just sounds, meaningless in the face of the betrayal she had inflicted. For the first time in years, Logan questioned everything about himself. Was he not enough? Had he failed her in some way? The insecurities he had never acknowledged came flooding to the surface. He began to lose sight of who he was before Clara, before their relationship. He realized that he had been so consumed by the idea of their perfect life that he had neglected his own needs, his own identity. He had given up parts of himself to make her happy, to build a future they both wanted, but in doing so, he had lost sight of the person he used to be. It was in the weeks that followed that Logan realized something profound. The pain of betrayal was like a wound that refused to heal, but in the midst of it, he began to change. His heart hurt, yes, but there was a quiet strength growing within him. It wasn't a strength born of revenge, of anger, but of self-preservation. He didn't need her. He didn't need her apologies or her attempts to explain. What he needed was to find himself again, to reclaim the parts of him that had been lost in the shadow of his marriage. He started small. He went for runs, something he hadn't done in years. He focused on his work, poured his energy into projects that had been left on the back burner. He reconnected with old friends, people he had neglected in favor of his relationship. And slowly, day by day, he began to feel like himself again. The pieces of his heart, broken as they were, started to come together in a way that felt less like a desperate attempt to fix what was broken and more like an intentional act of healing. For the first time in months, Logan smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness, not yet, but it was a smile of recognition. A recognition that he was not defined by Clara, not by her betrayal, not by their past. He was still Logan Hayes, a man capable of surviving, of growing, of transforming into something new. And it was in this newfound independence that Logan found the peace he had been searching for. He no longer needed closure from Clara. He no longer needed her to apologize or to make amends. He had come to terms with what had happened, and in doing so, he found the strength to move forward, alone, but whole. As the days turned into weeks, Logan found that time didn't heal all wounds, but it did teach him how to live with them. He still thought about Clara, still wondered how everything had fallen apart so quickly, but the pain was no longer as raw, no longer a constant ache in his chest. Instead, it had become a dull throb, a reminder of a chapter in his life that had closed. And in that silence, something unexpected began to bloom. Peace. He had always been the kind of person who sought answers, who needed closure. He had spent so much of his life trying to make sense of things, trying to understand why people did what they did, why they hurt the ones they loved. But now, in the stillness of his own mind, Logan realized that some answers didn't matter. Some things weren't meant to be understood. Some people were just meant to walk out of your life, leaving you with nothing but a lesson in self-worth and resilience. It was a hard pill to swallow at first, the idea that Clara might never come back into his life. He had spent years building a future with her, and to think that it could be gone in a moment was overwhelming. But as time passed, he began to understand that her betrayal wasn't just an end. It was a beginning. It was a beginning of a new chapter, one where he was the author, not the victim. Logan found himself spending more time outdoors, hiking and walking through the city. He felt a sense of liberation with each step. The weight he had carried for so long, the weight of expectations, his own and others, was slowly lifting. He realized that he was not just moving through life, he was living it again. He was reclaiming pieces of himself that had been buried under the weight of his marriage, under the illusion that his identity was tied to someone else. His friends noticed the change in him. They saw the shift in his demeanor, the quiet confidence that now radiated from him. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was a calm, steady assurance that he was enough, that he didn't need anyone to validate his worth. He was a whole person on his own, and that realization was more powerful than any external approval. But just as he was starting to feel whole again, Clara reached out. At first, it was a text message, simple, almost casual. "Can we talk? I need to explain." Logan read the message several times before putting the phone down. He didn't respond right away. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he even wanted to hear what she had to say. For weeks, the thought of Clara reaching out had loomed over him. He had imagined this moment in his mind, played out scenarios where they would meet, talk, and maybe, just maybe, find a way back to each other. But as the days passed, Logan realized that those scenarios weren't what he truly wanted. He had been clinging to the idea of closure, clinging to the hope that if he understood her reasons, if he heard her side, it would make everything feel less like a loss. But now he saw the truth. Closure wasn't something she could give him. Closure had to come from within. So he took his time. He spent a few days thinking about it, thinking about what this meeting would mean. Was he doing it for himself, or was he doing it to placate his own need for closure? Would hearing her explain herself change anything? Would it change the person he had become in her absence? The truth was, it wouldn't. He had already moved on. He had already started rebuilding himself piece by piece, and the idea of reopening the wounds that had healed so carefully seemed like a step backward. But Clara wasn't just a footnote in his life. She had been a significant part of it, and he owed it to himself to face her, not out of a need for closure, but out of a need to assert his own peace. So, one evening, he agreed to meet. The cafe where they had decided to meet was small and intimate, the kind of place where every table felt like a private conversation. Logan arrived early, not wanting to be late, but also not wanting to seem eager. He sat at a corner table, his hands folded on the table in front of him. His heart was steady now, calm. He didn't feel the flutter of nerves that he had expected. When Clara walked in, he stood up. She looked different. Older, perhaps, or maybe just tired. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She had always been beautiful, but there was something hollow in her eyes now. Something that wasn't there before. The sight of her made Logan's heart tighten, but it wasn't out of love anymore. It was out of something else, something that felt like pity, like he had outgrown her. "Logan," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry." He nodded, taking a seat again. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't sad either. He was just calm. "You don't have to apologize, Clara. You don't owe me anything." She looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed you in the worst way possible. I can't take it back, and I can't undo the pain I caused you, but I want you to know that I am sorry. I was lost, and I didn't know how to find my way back." Logan listened, but he didn't feel the need to respond right away. He had heard her words before: apologies, explanations, excuses. What he hadn't heard, though, was a genuine recognition of the fact that their relationship was over, that it had been broken beyond repair long before he had found out about the affair. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about this," Logan said quietly, "and I've realized something important. I don't need closure from you, Clara. I thought I did. I thought that if I could just understand why this happened, it would make me feel better. But it won't. I'm okay now. I'm better than okay." Clara looked at him, confusion and sadness in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've moved on," Logan said, his voice steady. "I've learned to be okay without you. I've learned to love myself again. And I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need you to make it right. I just need to move forward." There was a long silence between them. Clara reached for his hand, but Logan pulled back. Not out of anger, but out of a quiet certainty. "I've already forgiven you, Clara," he said, "but that doesn't mean I want you back. What we had is over, and I'm at peace with that." Clara's face crumpled, but Logan wasn't moved by her tears. He had cried enough for both of them, enough for their entire relationship. He had given her the best years of his life, and now he was taking those years back. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. Logan stood up, ready to leave. "Take care, Clara. I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that, he walked away. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet resolution. In the weeks that followed the conversation with Clara, Logan found himself in a place he never expected to be: at peace. The weight that had once been a constant, unbearable pressure on his shoulders was now gone. He had let go of the resentment, the hurt, and even the desire for revenge. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a gradual process of self-healing, of putting himself back together after the storm. It was strange at first, the quietness of his new life. The silence was unfamiliar, a stark contrast to the noise that had filled his days with Clara, the long conversations about their future, the laughter, the arguments, the passionate moments they once shared. But with every passing day, Logan found a new rhythm. It wasn't one he had planned for or even wanted, but it was his own. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that he didn't need anyone else's approval to live a fulfilling life. Logan began to focus more on the things that truly mattered to him. His work, for instance, which he had put on the back burner for so long while trying to make his marriage work, now became a central part of his life again. He threw himself into his career with a new sense of purpose. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder to gain the approval of his peers. It was about him, doing something that made him feel alive, something that gave him a sense of accomplishment outside of his relationship. He also found joy in the little things. Mornings that once felt like a rush to get through now felt like moments to cherish. He spent more time reading, rediscovering hobbies he had forgotten about, and going for long runs in the park. He didn't have to rush anywhere anymore. He was no longer trying to meet anyone else's expectations, and that felt liberating. But even more surprising was how Logan began to embrace his own emotional vulnerability. In the past, he had hidden behind the idea that he needed to be strong for others. He had spent so many years being the reliable partner, the steady one, that he had forgotten what it meant to be gentle with himself. It wasn't weakness to cry, to feel lost, to feel hurt. It was simply human. And for the first time in his life, Logan allowed himself to feel everything without shame. His friendships began to flourish in ways they hadn't before. He reconnected with old friends, the ones he had neglected over the years in favor of focusing solely on Clara. These friends had seen him through his younger days, through the highs and lows of life, and they welcomed him back without hesitation. Logan found that his relationships with them were deeper now, more meaningful. There was no pretense. He wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was just Logan, and that was enough. As the months passed, he found himself traveling more, exploring places he had always wanted to visit. One weekend, he went on a solo trip to the mountains. He spent the weekend hiking, meditating, and reflecting on his life. It was during this trip that Logan had an epiphany. He realized that in the past he had been waiting for the world to give him permission to live. He had been waiting for Clara, waiting for circumstances, waiting for approval. But now he saw that he didn't need to wait for anything. His life was his own, and it was up to him to make the most of it. When he returned from the trip, Logan began to make more bold decisions. He started a new project at work, one that had been in his mind for a long time but had always been pushed aside for the sake of others. He began pursuing a passion for photography, something that had always intrigued him but which he had never made time for. He joined a photography club and began learning from others who shared his interest. It wasn't about being the best. It was about embracing something that made him feel fulfilled, something that made him feel like he was truly living. But despite all the growth, there were moments when Logan felt the sting of loneliness. He missed having someone to share his life with, someone to talk to at the end of the day. And yet, even in those moments of longing, Logan never once thought of Clara. He didn't miss her. What he missed was the idea of having someone in his life, someone who understood him in a way that no one else could. But the reality was he had spent too many years sacrificing his own happiness for the sake of someone else's. He wasn't willing to do that again. It was at this point that he realized how much he had changed. He no longer sought out relationships to complete him. He had learned to be whole on his own, and that was the most liberating feeling of all. He wasn't running from his past anymore. He wasn't running from the hurt that Claire had caused. He had faced it head on and come out the other side stronger. Logan's life wasn't perfect. He wasn't always happy, but he had learned to embrace the imperfections, to live in the moment without constantly looking for something outside of himself to make him feel whole. He had learned the power of self-reliance, of self-love, and of walking away from anything or anyone that didn't align with his own peace. Months later, Clara reached out again. This time, her message was brief and to the point. "I've been thinking about you. I miss us. Can we talk?" Logan stared at the message for a long time before responding. He thought about everything they had been through, the love they had shared, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the healing that had followed. He thought about how far he had come since that day he walked away from her for the last time. His response was simple, but it carried all the weight of his journey. "I'm doing well. I hope you are too." And with that, he put his phone down and walked outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to look back. He had let go, and in doing so, he had found something far more precious than closure. He had found peace. As the months went by, Logan's life began to take on a new rhythm. The chaos of his past had faded into a quiet hum, a background noise that no longer dictated the pace of his days. His mornings had become moments of calm reflection, his evenings filled with simple pleasures, reading a book, preparing a meal, or calling a friend. He no longer rushed through life, no longer tried to force things to fit into a narrative that wasn't his. The freedom of living authentically was something he never imagined he could feel. His work flourished, as he had anticipated. Without the emotional drain of his previous relationship, he was able to focus entirely on his projects. He pushed himself in ways he hadn't before, taking on more responsibility and pursuing goals that once seemed out of reach. His colleagues took notice of his newfound confidence, and Logan was able to build a professional reputation that was truly his own, not defined by the relationships or expectations that once weighed him down. He had found purpose in his work, and it was deeply fulfilling in a way that nothing else ever had been. But it wasn't just about work anymore. It wasn't just about filling his days with productive tasks. It was about enjoying the life he had built moment by moment. And as Logan embraced this new version of himself, he began to see the world in a different light. He had stopped chasing after approval from others. He no longer sought validation from the relationships he had once clung to. He realized that true fulfillment came from within. Logan's transformation wasn't dramatic, nor did it happen all at once. It wasn't about some grand, life-altering event. It was the sum of small, everyday choices that added up over time. Choosing peace over anger, choosing self-respect over compromise, choosing to trust himself above all else. He began to take up new hobbies, things that he had always wanted to try, but had never had the courage to pursue. He signed up for painting classes, something he had always been intrigued by, but had never allowed himself to explore. His walls began to fill with canvases, abstract and colorful works that expressed the depth of his emotions, a language he had never known before. And through all of it, Logan continued to learn. He learned that healing didn't mean erasing the past. It didn't mean forgetting the pain or pretending it didn't happen. It meant finding strength in that pain, learning from it, and using it to grow. He had been betrayed, yes, but he had also been given a second chance to reclaim his life, to rediscover himself, and to become the person he was always meant to be. One afternoon, Logan received another message from Clara. It had been months since their last communication, and Logan hadn't expected to hear from her again. This time, the message was different. It wasn't an apology or a plea for forgiveness. It was simple, almost a passing thought. "I'm happy for you. I hope you found what you're looking for." For a moment, Logan sat in silence, staring at the screen. There was no anger in her words, no bitterness. It wasn't the kind of message he had imagined receiving from her all those months ago. In fact, there was something almost peaceful about it, something that felt like closure. But Logan didn't need her words to move forward. He had already found peace within himself, and that was enough. He didn't reply to her message. Not out of malice, but because he no longer needed to engage in a conversation that would take him backward. He had already walked away from that chapter, and he didn't need to go back. He had learned everything he needed to learn, and the answers had always been inside him, not in her explanations or apologies. Instead of dwelling on her message, Logan went for a walk outside. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. He breathed deeply, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. For the first time in a long time, Logan felt completely content. He wasn't perfect, and his life wasn't perfect, but it was his, and that was all that mattered. As he walked, he realized that he had come to understand something profound. It wasn't that he had completely erased the past. He hadn't. He still carried the scars of what had happened, the memories of the betrayal, the hurt, but those scars no longer defined him. They were simply part of his story, reminders of a journey that had led him to this moment. And in that moment, Logan knew that he had found something more valuable than any relationship. more valuable than anything he had once believed he needed to be happy. He had found himself, and as he continued down the path that had become his own, Logan no longer sought external validation. He no longer felt the need to explain himself to anyone, to prove that he was worthy, or to chase after something that was out of his control. He was content with who he was, where he was, and what he had built. His past no longer held him captive. It had shaped him into someone stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the quiet power that comes from accepting oneself fully. The peace Logan had found was not the absence of conflict, but the acceptance of it. It wasn't the absence of pain, but the ability to move forward in spite of it. And in that peace, he found something far greater than any apology, any closure, or any relationship. He found freedom, and that was enough.